Welcome to Tisha Talks Wellness. I'm Tisha, and welcome to Friday Night Live. On Fridays, we go live and we have mental health related discussions. We talk about how it affects our life personally. We look over some research and we see what we can take from the research to help us. So, welcome. Tonight, we're talking about hyper independence. Hyper independence, not just regular independence, but hyper independence. What it is, how do we even get to the point where we are hyper independent? Why it's a problem? Because I want to be clear, hyper independence is not a good thing. Autonomy and independence, great. Hyper independence can be a problem, and we're going to talk about why. And then we'll discuss how do we get better? How do we get better? Because remember, this channel is all about wellness. So at the end of the day, the point is for each of us to be better. And of course, everyone is different. Everyone has different experiences. Everyone is at different places in their lives. But we are going to take what we discuss, and then you can figure out what would be, what you can do with the information. So welcome. Good evening, Tiffany. Thank you for joining. This is going to be a good one. Hyper independence. So the reason I chose this topic is because this is pretty much 60 to 70% of the type of work I do at my day job as a mental health counselor. And I was telling someone the other day that, they need to be more vulnerable. And we were talking, we were just having a discussion about what it means to be vulnerable. Do we even know the true definition of being vulnerable? What it looks like for each of us differently. And I was telling someone how I don't have a lot of visitors at my home. And it's not because I don't have friends and acquaintances and family. It's just, first of all, I'm super busy. Second of all, I'm not the person that's going to have a house full. I love being home. My home is my sanctuary. I really take going to someone's house as personal. And she was saying how, most of her family is opposite and they love to have a house full. And when she first meets someone, she might invite them over. And I was like, yeah. That would be vulnerable to me, like letting a stranger, someone I don't know, I haven't known for a long time, come to my house, because my house is just, it's just something about it. I really have to trust you. And I have coworkers that I've known, for years, and we've grown into, maybe we will call ourselves work friends or maybe friends, right? That have never been in my house. And it's not because I intentionally do it, but it's just that is a level of vulnerability for me. It may be different for other people. So, and I was like, well, that makes sense. Like, home is just important to me, to have a place where I can just feel safe, sleep, eat, do whatever I need. And that's because I had a traumatic childhood. And I was like, I'll talk about this on Friday. How we get to the point of hyper independence, because it's definitely a trauma response. And depending on what type of trauma you may have experienced, and it doesn't have to be physical or sexual abuse. Those just two of the popular ones that we talk about the most, and two of the types of trauma that really, are extreme, but trauma can be moving a lot in your childhood. Trauma could be having a major medical issue and you're in and out the hospital. Trauma could be having a parent who you had to see be sick and you had to take on an adult role. So it's different types of trauma, but no matter what the trauma, we respond to it in a particular way. And hyper independence is definitely a way we respond to something that happened to us. So let's talk about what it is. Tonight, we are going to define what hyper independence is. We're going to talk about why it's a trauma response, because it just doesn't come from anywhere. Sometimes I have conversations with people and they'll say, no, that's just the way I am. That's just the way I am. I've always been that way. I want to do everything on my own. It has to be my way and nobody else can do it better. And I'm like, no, you're not born that way. We're not born with those types of behaviors and responses. So something happened and we can talk about it. We can talk about it to try to figure it out because no one is an island. So we do need alone time as humans, but more importantly, we need connection with other humans or we die, we shrivel, we become unwell. And I think no matter what we try to, how we try to twist it and turn it and cover it up, it just is what it is. We need each other. So you don't just develop those types of behaviors. Tiffany says, let's get her comment up. Oh, yes, I stayed with 4 emotionally unavailable adults in my childhood. Everybody arguing over refrigerator and dishes. Listen, when you grow up in a certain type of home, and if it's something that you specifically remember that you didn't like, what do we say? When I grow up, I'm not going to have da. When I grow up, you remember those things. So you value your space. You value your space. And that's how I was. When I had to move at some point, I had to move with my dad. Then I had to move with my grandmother, my great grandmother. Then I stayed a little bit with my dad. I just remember just feeling misplaced. I felt misplaced at times and, kind of unwanted because I knew I wasn't, at a home. And of course, my family loved me and I always had somewhere to stay. But when you get separated from your mother, you get this feeling of, I don't belong. So I just love my house. I don't care, from my first apartment, 1 bedroom, no furniture. I love where I sleep. I love my home. I do not play. Like, don't show up at my house unannounced. This is my peace. I don't care. I don't care how small it is. I don't care how fancy it is. My house is my house and it's my home. And I'm real funny about it. And I know why, because it's mine. I feel a sense of peace. Tiffany says, I feel that way also. I do not like visitors. Yes. Like, I got to plan it out, right? So, I know people who like, oh, pull up on me. I'm like, I'm probably not going to be the one to pull up on you. It's going to be planned. Because if you show up at my house unplanned, you're not going to get in. Because first of all, it's going to make me anxious. Like, I hear the doorbell ring and I'm like, who is this here? Who is this? But yeah, every now and then I'll have something at my house. But it is thoroughly planned out. It has a time limit. And I enjoy my loved ones. And then they go. Now, I pick up my nieces and nephews. Those events are planned out. It's a trauma response. It's a way that I soothe and I cope. So all this falls under trauma response and hyper independence. So we're gonna get there, y'all. But yeah, I don't think they love me. They didn't know what love was. True. Like our family, so as we heal, like those of us who have had traumatic experiences, specifically in our childhood, as you mature, you start to look at your family in a different way. You start to say, they really couldn't give me what I needed. Like, you daydream about how it could have been or how it should have been, right? You're like, wow, that would have been fun to grow up in a household where people weren't, on drugs or fighting and abusing each other. And then you look and you're like, well, no, because they grew up in that type of environment. They didn't have the tools. So it's I get what you're saying, Tiffany. They may not even have known they may not even have the tools to be able to give you what you needed. How do you discuss that with children? How do we discuss what, Tiffany, in response to our family? Like, how do you discuss with your children about your traumatic background? Could you specify the question? Could you clarify the question with your children, or how do you think it was supposed to be discussed with you? So while we are waiting for her response, let's go to slide 1, y'all. Hyper independence. Oh, you not liking visitors. Oh, you explain to people that it's your house is your space, and if they want, and if it's somebody you truly want to spend time with, tell them I really need to plan out. Like we need to plan out when you visit, or we need to plan out when we get together. Just say it, like that. Like, hey, did you come up now? Is this something like where somebody came by and you didn't let them in? I've had that happen before years ago, and I just simply said, hey, I noticed that you came by. I really wasn't together. I typically to plan out my visits. When I peeked out the door, I saw it was you. I didn't feel like it was an emergency, so my bad. And they were like, oh, yeah, my bad. I was in the neighborhood shopping, and I decided to stop by, and I was like, girl, don't do that to me. No shade. It's just how I am. We can definitely hang out. Love you lots. Love you to death. But can you give me a heads up? And I mean like a couple days heads up if you want to come over my house, or we can meet up somewhere. And most people are like, oh, no problem. I get it. I understand, girl. And, and let it be that. I would say communicate. Don't just keep ducking them or making up excuses, right? Like, no, I'm going to be walking my pet fish. You can't come over this weekend. Or, nope, gotta work 24/7, 8 days a week. Sorry, can't come over again. That starts to be kind of insulting. So I say always be, be honest and, within your boundaries. Tell them what you want them to know. And always remember, you can feel whatever you want to feel. If you feel a little bit guilty, that's great. Still set your boundary. Because I would rather feel guilty in my home, comfortable, than having people pop up or having people kind of keep asking me to come over. Does that answer the question, Tiffany? I hope that helps. How do we explain that to our kids? That's my husband, y'all. Oh no, we gotta figure that out. We gotta figure out how to explain them to get on. I'm weak. Sometimes my husband, he tells the kids, go home. And they're looking at her like, this is our home. We're gonna have to figure that out, babe. All right. I hope you guys can see this. Hyperindependence. Hyperindependence can result from significant emotional damage potentially caused by abandonment, broken trust, or betrayal. People with hyperindependence can be difficult to form connections with and tend to avoid companionship, preferring to live much of their lives in solitude. That's us, Tiffany, right? Look, that's us trying to figure out the wording of how to tell people don't come to our house. Hyper-independent people tend to be hostile to sharing emotions, maintaining relationships, and admitting defeats. That they will do all they can to avoid asking for help. So basically it's saying something happened, whether it be abuse, abandonment, betrayal, and it affects us to the point, or it affects whoever, who identifies as being hyper independent, so much that we are trying to not feel that again. So all of these behaviors that we see at the bottom is basically just us trying to keep ourselves safe. That's all it is. But what happens is some of the things that keep us safe actually is will wreck our lives. For example, it's nothing wrong with wanting solitude and alone time, but when that turns into weeks and months and years, not so good. that is what we call isolation. And we know isolation is not good for the development, emotional development, mental development. Any type of isolation is horrible for your mental health. And you basically just shrivel. You just stop growing. You stop growing mentally, emotionally, physically. You start to just ache and have organ issues. I think there's a research out there on like inmates, like there's a group that really, really, really wants to banish isolation in jail because it's horrific. Like you just the inmate just sits there and they pretty much just rot. Even if they get an hour outside of solitary confinement, it's still not enough. And I think the biggest issue is people might say, "Oh, well, they're in jail; they need to rot anyway." Well, it's a slippery slope. So if you have someone incarcerated, right, for a horrific crime, and people will say, okay, let them sit and rot. Well, that's a gray area because then what stops them from doing that to all of the black inmates or all of the inmates that rob banks? It's just a slippery slope. So I would say I would lean towards as least isolation as possible for anyone in life, even the inmates. Like, let them serve their time, but not so much isolation because it's horrible for your brain. Anyway, so the behavior of hyper independence is a response to not wanting to feel vulnerable. And y'all know how we are. Y'all don't let me get on us black women. How we are about vulnerability and being strong. We tend to lean towards hyper independence because we are primed, we are prepped for this type of behavior. Because remember, I know so many women who say, oh, my mama told me from 5, 6 years old, you need to have your own, don't depend on no man. Matter of fact, don't depend on nobody. So you have 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old children already being primed to be hyper independent, which is a hard behavior to reverse. Because once you get used to doing everything on your own, you tend to reinforce the belief, okay, I can do it on my own, only I can do it. Nobody can do it like me. If somebody does something for me, they're going to throw it in my face. So if you do this for 20, 30 years, it's really hard to reverse that behavior. But what happens is people who are hyper independent over a long period of time tend to have more mental health problems because they're doing everything by themselves. So they're overwhelmed, overworked, less connections, less support system because they've isolated. And that's where we start to see the mental and physical breakdown, the high blood pressure, strokes, weight gain, weight loss, negative thoughts, high rates of anxiety. So this is where you get into the cause and effect of being hyper independent. Right? People with hyperindependence are often seen as strong-willed, highly capable individuals, leading to the misconception that total independence shows the strength of character. There is a point, however, when you can become too independent and risk your mental and physical health by shutting people out and failing to form connections. So this is the part where we look into the effect of hyperindependence. We know the cause, which is some type of trauma, some type of betrayal, some type of feeling, unwanted or difficult feeling, which leads to the behavior of trying to do everything on your own. How does culture play into hyper independence? So everyone here now is Black, African American. Comment in the chat how you think our culture affects how people develop this behavior of being hyper independent. And even for men too, not just women. How do you think, what message do we send? Okay, let's go to the comments. Tiffany says, this is my hubby. I feel like he acts this way even though we are married. He is not vulnerable at all. He rarely talks about the past. He tries to do everything on his own. It's a mess. This comment fits perfectly for what I just asked about our culture. What does our culture say to our men, Tiffany? If you could just have like a brief sentence, what does the culture say to our men in regards to asking for help? I would say we are primed early, boys and girls. We are primed early to do things on our own, like do everything. Because we don't, I wouldn't say we have a collective culture. Our culture is more individualistic, hustle culture, accomplishment driven. You got to be the one, not the two, the best, right? A1, whereas collective cultures like Eastern cultures like Asian and those types of cultures, they're more collectivist. They more focus on the group. We don't. We focus more on individuals in the group. So a lot of times we get caught up in, doing us and not asking for help. And if we ask for help, we look needy. We look like we're begging. We look weak. So let's see what Tiffany says. Yep, our culture says, her response was, you're not a man if you can't do it on your own. Men don't ask for help. Hustle culture. Yes. You're a bum. If you can't do everything perfectly, you are a bum. That is what our culture. Even if your parents or your family don't say those words, look at what we praise or look at how we talk about people if they don't have every single thing they're supposed to have. So we definitely send the message that you got to do it on your own. And then to our women, the message we send through our actions. You got to be a strong black woman. You got to be able to do it all. You got to do it because you can't depend on no man because he going to leave you. He going to cheat on you and leave you. Right? He going to cheat on you and leave you with kids. And if he don't do it, mama got to do it all. And you got to work 3 jobs. And you got to look good while you're doing it. And you can't let nobody know you're struggling. That's stressful. I'm stressed. Let's even talk about that. Just even saying those words. I'm stressed. But it's the truth. So what happens is we model these behaviors for our children, and then we fall into those roles. So you have men who end up needing to do so much, thinking they're supposed to do so much, right? And not really being satisfied. So they either quit, right? Or they go do things that are not healthy, whether it be doing illegal stuff. It's just a lot of stress. And then in turn, we have our little girls who feel like they can just do anything forever. And what happens is, what I personally see is women working 4 times, 5 times more than they should be. And then we turn 30, 35 and we collapse. And we start to get depressed and we start to feel like failures and we start to gain weight. We're just like, what in the world? I'm just a mess. Why am I a mess? And I'm working 3 jobs and I'm taking care of all of my kids and I refuse help because I don't want people to talk about me and I'm angry and I'm upset. And it's just a pattern. And we find ourselves in these patterns and it's hard to stop because we don't want to look weak. Like, no, all of my kids have to have all of the new school clothes. Like, what if I was telling one person, I was like, what if you don't shop? What if you just didn't do the school clothes, the back to school clothes things? Just let them wear their summer stuff, buy a couple new shirts. And she was like, oh, I would never. My kids would think I didn't love them. I was like, you think your kids would disown you if you gave yourself a break and not put so much pressure on yourself to get all of these new school clothes? You think they would disown you? No, I think you tell yourself that. So Tiffany says, my son told me today he has to get bigger. He can be a man and be small out here. He can't be a man and be small out here. What in the world? Reassure him. Yeah, let him know. It sounds like he feels unsafe, right? It's like he feels like he has to be big so he can already armor and protect themselves. That's really sad. It's sad that our black boys feel that way. Yeah. Right. That part. Let's go to the research, y'all. Let's talk about trauma. So tonight's research is I wanted to pull in some research about trauma, just general trauma, and what it is, how it affects us, and how that ties into hyper independence. Because some people might say, well, just don't do everything. Just give yourself a break. It's not that easy. Because remember, depending on how you grew up and what type of trauma you experienced, you are spending a lot of energy not trying to hurt or not trying to feel let down. And that is not something you could just wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm great. I'm just not going to do it." It doesn't work that way. Trauma work is something you really have to work at and you develop. It's like you're re-raising yourself. You have to relearn how to feel safe. So where in your childhood or wherever the trauma happened, you didn't feel safe and you probably was mistreated. You have to go back and find safe spaces. Look at who's around you. Analyze your relationships. We have to really look and see, well, who can I talk to? Who do I feel safe with? Who can I go to ask for help? Because if you don't have that, you can easily re-traumatize yourself because you put yourself out there to ask for help, or something happens and people don't respond in a empathetic way. It re-traumatizes you and it reinforces the thought that, oh yeah, people just ain't nothing. They're not gonna help. If I don't get it done, it's not gonna get done. I'm weak. I'm gonna fall apart. So I have to do everything because no one is going to do it for me. No one is going to help me. So it's definitely a journey. It's something that you have to manage forever. So let's go to the research. Let's see. Why is my share screen not working? Are we on good time? Oh, yes, we are on perfect time. I'm trying to keep it at an hour, you guys. Let me see. Let's see. It is not. Show scenes window. Share screen. I'm not sure why it's not showing you guys. And one of my contacts feel like it's fell out. Let's see. So maybe I'll just read it so we can keep it moving. And I'll make sure I put the link in the description after I upload the live. Let's see. Is there a reason? Share screen. Show scenes window. Okay, I'll just put it back on the objective page and I'll read it for you guys. So you guys could, as I'm reading, you can kind of piece together why it's a trauma response. All right. Common experiences and responses to trauma. A variety of reactions are often reported and or are observed after trauma. Most survivors exhibit immediate reactions, yet these typically resolve without severe long-term consequences. This is because most trauma survivors are highly resilient and develop appropriate coping strategies, including the use of social supports to deal with the aftermath and effects of trauma. Most recover with time, show minimum distress, and function effectively across major life areas and developmental stages. Even so, clients who show little impairment may still have clinical symptoms or symptoms that do not fit diagnostic criteria for acute stress disorder or PTSD. Only a small percentage of people with a history of trauma show impairment and symptoms that meet criteria for trauma-related stress disorder, including mood and anxiety disorders. So let me put this in perspective for you. People are very resilient. But think about us. Think about some of the traumas we've experienced. First of all, just us as a people, as a black people. Think of the traumas we've generationally experienced on top of the trauma we continue to experience because of those past traumas. So think about, most people recover. We are not recovering. Us as a people are not recovering. That means there is re-traumatization over and over and over again. For example, so if you are a descendant of slaves, right, those traumas happen to your family. Then if you had to go through, Jim Crow era, that trauma gets passed down because our ancestors were beaten and segregated and treated. They weren't even considered people. And even when we, quote unquote, were freed, we still continued to be abused and treated inhumane, right? And I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg. Those things don't go away. So now we have generations of people who were abused. And we know what the response to abuse is. Some people become abusers. Some people shut down. Some people develop habits that are not healthy. I'm just talking about our people. So that resilience kind of wears down. So then you get through Jim Crow era and you still have redlining where they don't let us live in certain neighborhoods. You still have us getting scammed, our land being taken from us. We are literally being re-traumatized over and over and over. We don't get to be resilient? So this is how traumatizing to it. So even though this particular piece of research says, most people recover, they ain't talking about us. Hold on, let me get my coffee. I just want to be clear about that. I would not say this particular research pertains to us. So don't get it twisted, y'all. Because think about it. And then we continue to be re-traumatized by the way we are treated in the media. How we see, see black dead bodies all over our timelines. Re-traumatization, secondary trauma. So that absolutely ties into, if you go back to what we were talking about before, not feeling safe, dealing with some generational stuff, and not trusting each other. So we end up perpetuating the cycle of, we got to do it on our own. Every man for themselves. So that is how we continue to fall into the trap of hyper independence. Okay. The following sections focus on some common reactions across domains: emotional, physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, and developmental, associated with singular, multiple, and enduring traumatic events. What did I just describe, y'all? See? That's us. Enduring traumatic events. Re-traumatizing over. Didn't we just teach? Listen. How many of our entertainers we got to see be killed and shot down? How many of our black boys we have to see killed and enduring traumatic events on top of our own generational stuff. Let's check the comments, guys. Tiffany says, do you think people who are hyper independent have a hard time validating other people's feelings? Yes, I think one of the slides we talked about, it read about not tapping into emotions. So remember when I said suppression, like when you deny your emotions, you don't want to feel those difficult emotions, so you tend to start to feel numb. That is all a part of emotional intelligence, which means you understand your emotions and the emotions in other people. If you are shutting down and suppressing your feelings to feel nothing, it's going to, one, become hard to feel any feeling. So when you suppress the difficult emotions, you start to suppress the happy emotions too, because you can't be well and not experience all the emotions. I think people don't understand that. So what happens is we suppress for so long, we can't tell our own emotions, and we can't understand the emotions in other people either. We're just numb. We're literally not feeling anything because we fear being hurt or feeling vulnerable. I hope I answered the question. So yes, someone who is hyper independent can struggle with validating other people's feelings, because remember, a part of being hyper independent, you're invalidating your own feeling. So you're definitely going to invalidate other people's feelings, and you probably don't understand other people's feelings anyway, because you're too busy trying to feel safe. The behavior is a response to trauma, so you're just trying not to be hurt. That's a good question. Okay, let's go back, y'all. So let's look at the emotional effects of trauma. Emotional reactions to trauma can vary greatly and are significantly influenced by the individual's social, culture, history. We just talked about that. When I talk about slavery and Jim Crow and our history of being mistreated, not being treated humane, which affects how we see each other, how we see ourselves. So we're treated like nothing. We start to see ourselves as nothing, right? And then on top of that, some of us in turn turn into abusers or cope inappropriately with drugs or unhelpful behaviors. So that is the emotional thing that they are describing there. Beyond the initial emotional reactions during the event, those most likely to surface include anger, fear, sadness, and shame. However, individuals may encounter difficulty in identifying any of these feelings for various reasons. So there you go, Tiffany. So if there was an experience of trauma, and then in return the behavior is to shut down and not feel anything, so you won't feel hurt, you definitely have trouble identifying what you feel in other people, what other people feel too, which can cause problems in a relationship, right? Because if we can't tell what the other person is feeling or understand what they're feeling, or at least say, I get it, the other person will start to feel unseen, unheard, unloved, and we know that is not great for a relationship. Okay, let's get to emotional deregulation. So emotional regulation is my thing, y'all. This is what I do all week long. I support people with identifying their emotions, understanding what it means, being open to feel it, and then changing the response, because we cannot control our emotions. We only control our responses. So this is what I do. I can do this with my eyes closed. So I love emotional regulation because I found that is the key to happiness. That is the key to wellness. You can feel whatever you want. You can feel pissed off, sad, mad, happy. You don't change that. What you do is you change how you respond to it. So for example, if you're in a relationship and you really get triggered by being yelled at, instead of going upside the person's head, or instead of saying, oh, you don't yell at me a lot of times, let me just leave, because you're trying to not feel that trigger, you learn, okay, why does someone yelling at me trigger me so bad? Why do I have that reaction? And we go step by step to figure out, okay, what happened? Why do you have that type of emotion? It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just the is, first of all. And then I help the person identify why they have that response, why that response is just a response, and why they should not try to avoid avoid the feeling of getting upset, but embrace the feeling, but change how they respond. So instead of knocking somebody upside the head, pause, remember why you're being triggered. Oh yeah, I really hate when people yell at me because my mom used to yell at me all the time. Or I really hate when people yell at me is because I grew up in foster care and they used to yell at us all night long, and it really upsets me. So I know what's happening here. Let me pause and let me do something different. And then you practice that over and over and over again until you it's like riding a bike. You When you get pissed off, you instantly know what it is. And you're able to have a healthier response. So that's what I do all week long. So I love emotional regulation because it validates our emotions, and we get to tell ourselves, I'm not out of control. I am not out of control. I can control my responses 100% of the time, and I can feel whatever I want to feel. I'm not a bad person. I'm not an angry person. I can feel what I feel, and I'm in control, and I got this. Let's look at the comments before we move forward. I done went off on a tangent. Can't y'all tell I love emotional regulation? Tiffany laughing. Yes, because emotional regulation saved my life. Okay, let's finish off about trauma, and then let's think about how we can use this in our everyday life in regards to being less hyper independent and more open to vulnerability, whether that is not isolating, asking for help. So let's read a little bit more of the research. I'm so mad I can't share my screen, but we're gonna move on. We're gonna get it done. Okay, so emotional regulation. Some trauma survivors have difficulty regulating emotions such as anger, anxiety, sadness, and shame. That is more so when the trauma occurred at a younger age. In individuals who are older and functioning well prior to the trauma, such emotional deregulation is usually short-lived and represents an immediate reaction to the trauma rather than an ongoing pattern. And this is because when we are young, that is supposed to be the time where we are learning how to regulate. That's where we're supposed to have tantrums and have arguments and have fights and socialize and go to dances and interact with people at school. That is supposed to be the time where we have our training wheels on. But guess what? Some of us went through traumatic experiences. So as what the research says, children don't bounce back as fast as an adult who experienced trauma, because that is prime time for development. So when a child experiences some type of traumatic event, whether it be physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, a major life change, major moving, medical issues, instead of continuing to develop how to deal with our emotions, we figure out a way to feel safe. So when you meet people who act very childish in their emotional responses, something happened. I don't care what they might say, oh, nothing. Maybe you weren't sexually or physically abused. Maybe you moved a lot. Maybe you were neglected. Maybe nobody took care of you like you should. Something happened, because people who had healthy spaces to develop emotionally, you can tell. They tend to be, they have more self-control. They are more resilient. They can become angry without lashing out a lot. So it's those are telltale signs of childhood trauma, when a person cannot regulate emotionally. Have y'all ever seen somebody like go off, like in the grocery store or somewhere, like just straight up wow, and you're like, what happened? Like emotional deregulation. They feel emotions so deeply, they feel so out of control. They act like a child, and they really can't control it. They probably need therapy. But that is what emotional deregulation looks like. Someone who is out of control. They're either trying to hide those difficult feelings, don't know what to do with difficult feelings. So they tend to respond in ways that an adult doesn't. And usually it wrecks your life. Oh, I know. It wrecks your life. So, Support each other. When you see somebody that takes pride in going off and wrecking things, I know inside something is not, well. Because in the moment it might feel good, but the older you get, you can't be acting like that. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna get in your own way. And all that is emotional deregulation. Traumatic stress tends to evoke two emotional extremes: feeling either too much, which is overwhelmed, or too little, numb. Treatment can help the client find the optimal level of emotion and assist him or her with appropriately experiencing and regulating difficult emotions. What I just say? You gotta experience your emotions. In regards to hyper independence, you gotta open up and be willing to be let down, because trying to do it all is killing you. It's literally gonna kill you. You can't do it all. No one, not one person. And continuing to try is killing you, and your regulation is off. So that's when you get a person who is drained, burnout, tired, irritated, just not. It's just the worst feeling. It's just you're just existing. What is happening is your nervous system is just shutting down, or you might be turned up. Like if you're an anxious person, you might always be anxious because you're not giving yourself a chance to just be and relax. We should do a live in the next couple months on emotional regulation and go through each emotion, like anger. How do you regulate when you're feeling anger? Because some people shut down, some people lash out. I think that's what I'm going to do for Mental Health Month. I'm trying to go live for 30 days. I don't know if I want to. If I plan it out correctly, I could. But I would love to go live for 30 days and do a deep dive in difficult emotions, because that's what we typically struggle with: anger, frustration, jealousy, disappointment. We struggle with those emotions. Let's read numbing, and then let's talk about how we can use what we learned tonight, or what we talked about tonight, in our own everyday life. It could be something so small, so simple. Numbing. Numbing is a biological process whereby emotions are detached from thoughts, behaviors, and memories. In the following case illustration, so they have a case, but we're not going to go over the case. Sadhana. Why they call this girl Sadhana? Are they trying to be funny, or is this like a cultural name? Numbing is evidenced by her limited range of emotions associated with interpersonal interactions and her inability to associate any emotion with her history of abuse, which sounds correct. So let's say that again. She has a limited range of emotions associated with interpersonal interactions and her inability to associate any emotion with her history of abuse. She also processes a belief in a foreshortened future. Because numbing symptoms hide what is going on inside emotionally, there can be a tendency for family members, counselors, and other behavioral health staff to assess levels of traumatic stress symptoms and the impact of the trauma as less severe than they actually are. So what they're saying is she numbs, so she doesn't feel anything. So probably in regards to this case, it's hard for people to gauge like how depressed she is, or really how exhausted she is. Who does that sound like? Hyper independent people. Because typically hyper independent people are very tired and exhausted because they're doing everything. They're overachievers. They're perfectionists. They got 3 jobs, 14 degrees. They move their own house. They decorate their own house, right? They don't want help from anyone, which is exhausting. But like the research says, people around them probably cannot gauge it, especially if they're outside the culture, right? So they might say, oh, you have it all together, girl. You just do everything. And you do it on your own. Yeah, I do it, girl. I'm an independent woman. Miss Independent. Go home about to fall apart. Okay. Let's go to the comments and then we'll get ready to analyze. Tiffany said, I almost went up somebody's head. Oh, I've been there, definitely. Sometimes, and especially like when you are, so what happens is those of us who didn't have the space to develop emotionally, it really goes down in the 20s, right? Because in your 20s, you are almost, you're considered an adult, but you have a chance to kind of like have more deeper connections. So when you start getting into relationships or people start testing you, that's when all hell breaks loose. Because you're like, why can't I control myself? Because these people is trying me. And you start to be like, hold up. Now, I almost cussed 4 people out this week. Is it me? Am I the drama? Am I the drama? Yeah, I think I might be the drama. And what's really going on is you never learn how to emotionally regulate. So when you get pissed off or boom, somebody try you, you instantly get triggered and you don't know how to deal with that feeling, but whoop, upside your head or, nice little cuss out. When in actuality, you can feel those feelings, but you just need to learn how to be okay with feeling it. All right, so what is hyperindependence? I like really simple definitions. So in regards to what we talked about tonight, I would say hyperindependence. Let's go with a simple definition like hyperindependence is just being overly independent and refusing help because you don't want to feel helpless due to a trauma. Is a behavior that someone engages in order to numb their emotions, to protect themselves from hurt or harm. I like that definition. When you watch the playback or when you get off this live tonight, try to make your own definition, like in simple ways that you can remember it. Like you don't have to remember every single word we read in the research. Think of small, just word associations: hyper independence, trauma, hurt, numbing. Because this way you remember the information, and when it comes up, it's instantly going to be like, oh, that's what that is. That's what we talked about on live. So if I did a word association for hyper independence, I would put trauma, hurt, numbing. Tiffany says, I feel like my husband do things to him hyper independent, like being reckless with money and not paying bills on time. I'm emotionally unregulated. I'm trying though. Yes, it's an everyday practice. Definitely. And the fact that you acknowledge it, you've done the biggest part. Like when you acknowledge like, whoa, my response is just out of control. Like when I feel hurt or when I feel unsafe, I really have a response that's not helpful. And language is important too. So when you have those times when you're unregulated or you have a response where you're like, ooh, I ain't had to do all that. Instead of saying that was a good response or that was a bad response, maybe try saying, was this helpful for me? I cussed the lady out in Food Line because she started with me. But was that helpful for me? That's what I started doing. Because I'm definitely a person who would never start anything with anyone. But if you come over here, what the man say? F around and find out. That's how I used to be like. You pinch me, I'm coming back with a hammer. And I started, I had to ask myself, was that response helpful for me? And a lot of times when I first started, I would be like, no, that was not helpful. That was not helpful. No, it was not helpful for me. And as I developed and went through my own processes and therapy, you just get better. It's like riding a bike. You fall off a few times. When you first start, you fall off more when the training wheels come off, and then you get better at it. You get you get so better at it. When you get pissed off, you instantly know, let me take a break. Let me take a break. I know I'm mad. I know I'm mad. I do not want to slap nobody. And you start, you know yourself so well, you start to have more helpful responses than unhelpful. And it's like clockwork. So if you notice, I didn't say I don't get mad. I get mad all the time. I get pissed off all the time. I said I know how to respond to my anger. I get it. And remember, it's only 90 seconds between the trigger and when when your system dies down. So you know how many people who have died behind an emotional trigger when it only lasts 90 seconds. But again, you just keep working at it. Keep working at it, Tiff. Comment says, I meant to keep him. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I got what you said. I get you. I get you. And I appreciate you interacting on here with me. How would you guys define why is it a trauma response? How could we put that in plain words? What do you think, Tiffany? How could we put hyper independence is a trauma response? Let's put it in plain words. I would say it's a trauma response because we are meant to connect. Humans are meant to connect with each other. So when someone intentionally refuses help or wants to do everything on their own, it is a direct response to being hurt. So they don't want to be hurt. I hope that's simple enough. If you're watching the playback, hey, put in the comments what your simple definition would be so you can remember this. So that's my simple definition. Y'all can put in the comments. How would you explain to a 5th grader why hyperindependence is unhelpful and is definitely a trauma response? And lastly, how can we apply what we discussed to our life? I won't say like trying to find a balance, because you work towards balance, but I don't think we ever reach balance. I would say, like we were talking about before, Tiffany, let me make sure I get, hey, how can we apply this to our life? I would say definitely stay checked in with yourself. Make sure you're checking in with yourself and being honest with yourself about your connections and opening up and having a vulnerable place. So some people would say, I don't have anyone to talk to. Get a therapist or join a support group. Because if you feel like you don't have anyone or not one safe place to speak, it's dangerous for you. Because what are you doing with all your emotions? How are you making sense of what you are experiencing? And don't say, I don't need nobody. I can just live my life and I don't care what nobody think. Great. But what are you doing with your perspective? What are you doing with your emotions? You got to do something with them. Like, who head do you talk off? That's why I ask people, like, who can you call and just ramble on and on and on and on and on? You need that. It needs to be at least one space. That could be a therapist. That could be a friend. Because that's like resetting, emotionally resetting. And you're dumping your stuff out and you can kind of make sense of it. If you never talk about it, you never admit it, you can't make sense of it. And that's what drives that out of control feeling of not knowing, like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I went off. I don't even know who I am. It's because you're not dumping. You're not having a safe space to get it out. Let's look at the comments. Tiffany says, ask for help. Yep. I like that simple definition. I like that simple life, like what you're going to take for this. Yes, ask for help, and it's not going to be easy either. Here's a tip. Instead of saying, I'm going to ask for help and, just keep it there, put ask for help. I'm going to ask for help. And how is it going to feel? And be honest, like we could say, oh, it's going to feel scary. I'm scared people are going to talk about me. I'm scared I'm going to feel judged. It's okay to feel that way. Ask for help anyway. Because that's what's going to combat the independence. Because if we let the thoughts and the fear of the emotion get to us, we'll change our mind. We'll say, oh no, I'm not asking for help. They're not going to be talking about me. Or I'm not asking for help. I don't want to look needy. I don't want to look weak. And then if we just stop right there, you're right back in the pattern then, right? There you go. You're back alone. And the whole point of combating or healing hyperindependence is to take opportunities to not be alone, to connect. And I would say some ways that you can decrease hyperindependence is to share. Even if you're a person that has everything, doesn't need anything from anyone in regards to like physical stuff or money, share your experience with someone. Pick up the phone and call them. Text them. Hey, I just got back. Had a long day at work. It doesn't have to be someone doing something for you or having to buy you something. It can be you sharing, because one of the characteristics of very hyper independent people is they can be very private because they want to hide any issues they might have, right? That's a sneaky way to be hyper independent. Like, be super, don't tell anybody anything, because they're scared that if a person knows that they are struggling, that it might make them look like they don't have it all together. But we definitely can continue this conversation. I can go on and on, but I'm not going to keep you guys very long this Friday night. Tiffany says, I will feel scared. My feelings have been invalidated so many times. Yes, super scared. So what about when you ask for help and people make you feel bad about it? What do you do then? I would say you do some self-reflection. If you can't talk to them about it, kind of reflect and see, is this a safe space? Remember where I was talking about when I was like, make sure, have a safe space. So if you ask the person for help and they make you feel bad about it, depending on, how are they making you feel bad, right? You really hash it out. Like, is it the response? And is it because they didn't respond the way I wanted them to respond? Or are they really an a-hole? Like, really reflect on it. And then you might come to the conclusion, oh, that person's not a safe space. I love them. That's my favorite cousin. But I can't go to my favorite cousin when I need help. Or I can't talk to my favorite cousin because it's not safe. They might not have the tools. And that's okay. And guess what? You got hurt. But guess what? You learned something. That would be what I would do when I push through being scared and share something with somebody or ask them for something and they didn't, it wasn't a helpful response. I would say, okay, maybe they can't give me what I need, and that's all right. But you don't let it deter you from asking for help or opening up, because remember, we want to do the opposite. We don't want to shut down. We want to welcome those emotions. All right, you guys. Well, this was a good one tonight. Hello to the playback people. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for being so interactive. I always enjoy you. You gonna have to listen, Tiffany. What's up? You gonna have to come live one night. Didn't you say you wanted to speak or something at some point? You should get your practice on with me, girl. You should definitely think about coming live with me, like being a guest. I would love to have you. I would really love to have you. Just let me know. Just inbox me if that's something you would be interested in. I appreciate you guys for watching. And I will see you next Friday. Thank you for watching, and be well, everyone.